Welcome to episode 141 of the Thunder Underground podcast. My name's Trent. This is Jason. And this week we've got close to an hour and a half of punk rock and roll.
This is great.
Yeah. This is something we've actually been talking about for a while because early on, episode 33, Dave Cantrell joined us.
Yeah.
For a lengthy talk about just his history in music and what he's done. And he talked a little bit about this at this time because, you know, this has been going on for a few years, and that's been a couple years ago now.
Yeah, this documentary, yeah.
So we've been kind of looking forward to it, and then once we're here now at the point where this thing's getting ready to debut, and here we are. We got not just Dave, but we got Bryan Crain, who's kind of spearheaded this thing, and then Terry Waska as well.
Yes.
So, you know, every once in a while here on this podcast, 141 episodes, it gets to involve punk.
Yes.
And it's been here and there. Not, you know, we're admittedly both metal and hard rock guys, but we also love our punk. But yeah, I mean, throughout the history of this podcast, we had Chad Malone.
Yes.
You know, who was featured in this documentary. Like I said, Dave Cantrell. Other guys that we'll talk about here in a bit that are scattered throughout this, and, you know, guys from Street Dogs, and then we've had Lola from Redneck Nosferatu right here, the Normandies.
Definitely.
So we've not done it as much as we'd like, but so this is a really great thing because I know I love punk, but I think you're even a bigger fan than I am at times. So
yeah, I mean, I it's something I really, you know, I can connect with, and I love the, you know, just the punch of it. And, you know, this episode we're about to unfurl for you, this conversation was an honor, and it was really cool, you know, kind of learn about the scene before, you know, we were, you know, while we were still kids, and, you know, we kind of just got educated on, you know, what was going on. And, so, you know, this is going to be a good one.
Yeah. Yeah. We didn't even mention this is called, like it says there in the title, Old Capitol Underground.
Yes. The
Evolution and Genesis of Punk Rock in Tulsa.
Yes. And
it starts around 77 and goes up to the mid-90s. So like you said, that's before us.
Yeah.
That's basically when we were born. I was born in 77, you 76.
Yeah.
So like you said, and you mentioned in Here to Them, we didn't catch a lot of this till the tail end of it. You know, it was the late 80s that we got into music, of course, as kids, and then it wasn't until the early 90s when we were going to shows all the time.
Yeah.
So we got to see a few of these bands, but a lot of them, like, you know, TA, Lotus Reactors, and the stuff they feature was way before our time, and we never got a chance to be a part of that.
Yeah, so it was great to learn about all that, and, you know, is, you know, kids going to see these bands, to talk to them now, it's pretty cool, and just to kind of get a feel of what it was like back then was great.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was a great history lesson, and really looking forward to seeing this movie.
So speaking of the history lesson, let's play one of these songs.
Let's do it.
NOTA is probably one of the most featured bands in this doc because they're one of the most famous punk bands from this area. This song's called War on Wankers. War on wankers, what you gonna do?
a fucking drag. Where you are is really too sad. People there should not, I don't give a fuck. I hate you, let it run. Fuck you up with a baseball bat. I don't care what anyone thinks about that. Fuck you up with a baseball bat. I don't care what anyone thinks about that. War on wankers, what you gonna do? War on wankers, gonna get you. War on wankers, what you gonna do? War on wankers, gonna get you. War on wankers, war on the wankers, war on wankers, war on the wankers.
War on Wankers from NOTA. I mean, that's just a great song. Like, we were sitting here before we were recording this, doing a run through on this song and the song we're going to play here in a bit, and both of us were kind of singing.
We couldn't get out of our heads.
Right. Singing this song while we were waiting to listen to the other song, you know?
Yeah.
But I mean, you listen to a song like that and you really hear, you know, it sounds like classic underground punk, but at the same time, you really hear how stuff like that influenced thrash bands.
Definitely.
Because, you know, I don't know if Anthrax ever heard NOTA, but when you're listening to that, Anthrax being one of my favorite bands, I really hear where they got something. You know, I mean,
Definitely.
we know that Charlie Benante and probably other guys in the band are big fans of Husker Du, and, you know, that goes along with all this stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, and that's obviously what they talk about in this doc, is this branches off into the thrash stuff as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it sure did.
Speaking of thrash, later Pitbull's on Crack,
That's right.
you know, is featured in this as well. Steve Ray's been on this podcast a couple times. And I mean, he's a big part of the history of the heavy side of Tulsa music. And another cool thing to point out with that is, you know, we just did an episode last week with Sprout from Screaming Mutiny.
That's right.
And this is a guy that, Sprout's close to our age, and he's only been part of the music scene for a couple years in Tulsa.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he came from Kansas. And, you know, he brings up Steve Ray and what he's meant to him and how, you know, much he's been a part of his music and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
There. You know, so that kind of shows a lot for this guy because, you know, Steve Ray's been around since we were kids and still to this day influence people
Yeah.
that are currently making music.
That's right. You know, what else can you say about Steve Ray? I mean, Oklahoma Braves, that's what he's doing now, and they're amazing. But yeah, Pitbull's on Crack, that was, it was so exciting to see a thrash band, heavy band, you know, from Tulsa, you know, that was kind of like, you know, that was our thing, you know, kind of right up our alley. I don't know, if you never saw him back in the day, I don't know what to tell you. You missed out, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, you can see little snippets on this doc.
Yes.
But one thing to point out, you know, he was on here recently. I think it was episode 110. And then way back, he was one of our early interviews.
Yeah.
And let's tell this story in case you haven't heard that old interview. Was we went and saw him. One of the times we saw him was opening for Lucy's Fur Coat.
Yes.
And he kind of chuckled when we said that because I guess he's not a big fan of Lucy's Fur Coat. I don't know.
I don't know. I can't even remember.
Anyway, the point is, there was literally like 18 people in the crowd. And of those 18 people, us and our friends were like 8 of them.
Yeah.
And anyway, Steve, like during his set, stopped and had everybody introduce themselves.
Because there was
literally just enough people.
There was just enough people. It's like, fuck it, just introduce yourselves, you know?
Like, he introduced his band. He's like, hey, all you guys. And he gets down and goes up to each person with the mic. And, you know, and our buddy Mike Thrasher was there. And we got to him. He's like, he thought he was bullshitting that his last name was Thrasher. He's like, no. And he made him show him his license right there.
And he showed Steve his license.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It was cool to be able to tell him that story, too.
Yeah.
You know?
But Terry Waska was also a part of that for a while, and, you know, he's featured here in this interview in a bit. Another guy that's been on this podcast is Chad Malone.
Yes.
And that was way back at episode 58. And in that episode, we talk, you know, this guy's been a part of a lot of bands around Tulsa.
Yeah.
back then and now, he's still currently in 3 or 4 bands.
Mm-hmm.
And the great thing about it is they're all diverse from each other.
Yes.
He's got Senior Fellows going, Larkin. That's as opposite end of the spectrum as you can get.
Yeah.
And then The Shame, of course, which is a great punk band. And then Brother Inferior, which is featured in this
That's right.
podcast. So let's get to that and play some Brother Inferior.
All right.
This is Bound and Gagged. Bound and Gagged from Brother Inferior, straight out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And one of the things when we had Chad Malone on, he talked about when they toured through Europe, and he told us all kinds of great stories about good times and some bad times as well.
Yeah.
So definitely go check that out. That's definitely worth a listen because he goes into all these bands, and it's really cool. But yeah, Bryan Crain, Terry Waska, Dave Cantrell sat down with us for well over an hour and told us all kinds of stuff about this documentary and old stories. And another thing to point out, one of the guys that's featured in this that wasn't part of a band was Kay, who was part of the Tulsa music scene.
Yes.
If you were around back then, you knew who he was. I mean, I never even spoke to him, but I knew who he was because I'd seen him there.
Exactly.
And I know you said that you had a run-in with him once or twice back in the day.
Yes.
Like you said, probably every band did.
They used to have, you could just do like an open mic thing and go get on the list on a weeknight at the Eclipse. And we went, and Eric Bass, our bass player, he didn't have any shoes on. He was barefoot, playing barefoot. Kay was not a fan of that, and he let us know. But he let us play anyways. So it was a little scary.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the cool thing about this documentary is it's not just focused on a few bands. It spans this good 16, 18-year period and talks about venues and all that stuff we'll get to here in a bit. The thing is have a preview screening October 6th at Circle Cinema, 7 p.m., $10.
That's right.
And the cool thing about this is all of that $10 from every ticket goes to the Circle Cinema.
That's awesome.
And this is a preview screening, and this actual premiere is going to be later, and I'll talk about that and what's going on with that.
They're doing a Q&A after the showing.
Yeah. I think there's actually said like a reception before the showing. Mm-hmm. There's probably food and drinks, and I think there's a performance, and then, like you said, a Q&A with these 3 guys afterwards.
Yeah.
So if you listen to this and there's something you don't hear that you want to know about, get out there and ask them.
That's right.
And then afterwards, there's an after party at the Blackbird on Pearl, which used to be the Eclipse, right?
That's right.
So anything else we need to talk about before we get into this?
I think we covered it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should just roll that beautiful bean footage.
Hell yeah. Dave Cantrell, Bryan Crain, Terry Waska, Old Capitol Underground.
Yeah, it goes from the late 70s to mid 90s to where it's like,
That's all the post-punk kind of stuff. So
and it's a great line.
Pit bulls and bunnies and
Because when thrash, it's like, yeah, there was some thrash, but it went more on the metal side, like the, like
theatrics and
and all that. They weren't really in the punk scene, but like Asylum was, because they drew the punk crowd in. So it's a gray area. We don't go into we go to the punk thrash, like Pit Bulls. They started off as a hardcore band, then went more thrash. Same with Bunnies of Doom. They started off and but then there was bands because they could play with punk bands or the metal bands. Right. You know what I mean? So there's this gray area, and the good thing about that era is we were all there, so we kind of have a good thumb on that. Yeah. The earlier stuff we knew, but we actually 4 or 5 of the guys that were in bands, we'd always ask them. You know what I mean? We interviewed them, but I'd call them up all the time and call them historical consultants now, just to be cool. But we'd always say, hey, do you think that band was this? Because they were there. It's not like we did our opinion. We did our research. It's like, okay, is that, to make sure. Because some of them was like, that doesn't sound like Food Chain, Sarah. Yeah. I was like, that just sounds like new wave stuff. And I was like, were they, because we wanted to put some girls in it because, man, it's a lot of dudes. That's what it was. Yeah. And, but, so she was like, they said, yeah, they were considered that. And they played in that, thing. And here's Dave. I wonder how late he is.
I guess the most obvious question is, how did this come about? Whose idea was it? Where did everything start?
Well, about 6 years ago, I was living in Colorado, and I was thinking about moving back, and I'd been working on some stuff with my own old music videos, VHS. I noticed how degraded everything was getting on that end, so I was like, it'd be cool to think of something creative to do when I got back to Tulsa. Maybe I could hook up with some bands and make a documentary before all that stuff, turns to dust. And I called Bryan, and apparently he'd been thinking the very similar thing. And so we, for the first couple of years of this project, did some long distance work. I'd come to town a couple times a year, and we'd collect videos and do a few interviews, and then it just kind of snowballed from that, especially once I got moved back.
Yeah, we, it's been what? We really got going on it in probably 13, 12, something like that, a little bit. 11, we just, like he said, we got interviews and stuff, and then he would come back and visit, and we'd have it's like, hey, here's what I got. Because I got my own equipment, started my own LLC, doing other things, and I was like, okay, got a camera, all my own gear now. Because, my day job's been TV for years, so I want to do something on my own, and I was in the scene too. All 3 of us were back in that scene, and that's how we kind of met in the 80s, so late 80s, I guess, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, I always wanted to do something on the scene with music involved because it's such a unique thing for Tulsa. I mean, it is around here, rednecks and crap, And so he came back, and we've been in communication. We're friends anyway besides this, so it was like we always talked about stuff. And then, yeah, when he moved back, it made it a lot easier because, even though I was editing and shooting and stuff, it's like, you can't work in a vacuum. And then Terry got jumped in later. That kind of whacked into, wasn't it?
Yeah, I would kind of waited till it got farther along to see what I needed to do.
Yeah. He does a lot of the art and stuff and illustrations in it. And he did the title graphic, so. But yeah, we didn't have a name for it for most until about 2 years ago.
Yeah.
We started throwing names back and forth, and it just kind of came up, We didn't want to call it something obvious like Tulsa,
Right.
We wanted to come up with a clever title, but.
And it didn't really have a direction until about, 2013, 2014. It was just, he would complain, he's like, we need to have an idea where this is going. And I'm just like, let's interview this guy, and let's interview this girl, and let's get this band's video. And we just stockpiled it first, and then kind of chiseled away at a storyline as it developed.
Yeah, originally we were just going to do our generation, like mid 80s to early 90s, but we'd already did so much of a backstory with a few other older people, not older people, but generation before us. I was like, why don't we just do the whole thing? I mean, we're that close. Go interview some more people, and so we kind of late 14s when we did that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just kind of blew up the beginning of it and started over, and then went from there. And because we were like, yeah, I mean, it'd be silly to just leave out basically 8 years.
Yeah, originally it was going to be like an hour long and kind of start with NOTA, who were like the original hardcore band, and kind of like NOTA and their offspring or something, the scene that kind of came post NOTA, before, the first wave or second wave of generation after NOTA. But then they were so intertwined in the early punk scene in Tulsa that it was, we couldn't deny that. We had to go back and get all those other guys that at first glance seemed maybe kind of new wave or lighter, but at the time, late 70s, early 80s, was considering really off the wall and cutting edge here in Tulsa. So we respected what they did. So we added a lot of other stuff that we didn't originally plan for and that we didn't really even know about. Just as we interviewed people, then it would like branch off and like, well, we'd go talk to this person recommended. And we found out what they were doing or who they were involved with and how far back the roots go. Yeah, and it was like, back then too, a lot of the stuff was kind of new wave and punk. It was the same thing. So sometimes we had to, call and say, hey, you sure this band is kind of, we have like Roger and Anthony and Greg Sewell and Roger
a few
Scott
others.
from Los Reactors.
Yeah, a few of the guys that were in those bands and in the scene, and we'd always call and ask them questions like, are you sure? And they said, yeah, they were in that same scene. It was all kind of mixed together, and it's all told in the story now. I mean, the interviews told it well, how it changed and evolved. But yeah, some of that stuff they listen to and like, that sounds like new wave. But back in Tulsa, I mean, we were like 5 years behind the rest of the world back then. There was no internet or anything.
Well, if it wasn't Led Zeppelin, then it was punk. It was, it wasn't mainstream at all. Then it was punk. So that's kind of where it all started.
Like you said earlier, if it's not Boston or Kansas.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Well, Terry and I came from more of a heavy metal background. We were in a band called Asylum. So if it wasn't super hard, we liked hardcore and speed metal. If it wasn't like that, then it didn't seem punk. It seemed quaint because we were so far removed. We didn't realize at the time, you'd hear the keyboards or whatever and the stuff, and you just go, oh, that's just new wave stuff. It's not. And, as you age, you get a little more wisdom and you expand your taste, and maybe you can take some of the blinders off your eyes and like, oh yeah, I guess I was too young and dumb at the time and didn't see how different that really was for what was going on around here.
But I mean, now you see that like Talking Heads were one of the first bands that played CBGBs. Who would have thought of that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I first got into it was back in the mid '80s. My friend Mike Armstrong, we met him at some girl's house, and he had a mohawk and
Spike Mike.
Yeah,
that's how I knew him.
Yeah,
Spike Mike.
And he was in the punk scene, so he took us all these places like fields, like a place called the Ditch, way out south, and it was just a drainage ditch where all these people hung out and drank and skate and and it was cool. It was a whole different world out there, and we'd always pick it on the gravel pit on Riverside. Maybe like 50 people out there were drinking alcohol and stuff and carrying on right on Riverside.
Delinquents.
Yeah, that wouldn't happen today, and skinheads would show up, but they wouldn't mess with us. I mean, but they were kind of around that, and they caused a lot of crap in town, of course, but not all of them were bad. I mean, some of them were cool to us and whatever, but some of them stood for different things than others, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but then that's eventually. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to change the subject, but I know what these two guys' background is in music, which...
Yeah, I played in a band called The Outcasts. We were just... It's not even... They're not really in the doc. I have some Easter eggs in there of us, But that's... We played, like, parties and stuff. We played with some of the bands, like Crimes Against Humanity and stuff, and we basically did parties and house stuff. We used to have phone bill gigs for $1, charge people to come over and watch us practice. To pay our phone bill.
Then he was in a band called Decadent Lament.
Yeah, we won't talk about that. That was let it in, but yeah, that's how we met.
Didn't you? Was it the last night Nitro's called?
Yeah, we
Nitro?
played there. Yeah. We played
it was the last night, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the last night.
So the last night,
yeah,
Nitro was called Nitro before it closed for a while and became Eclipse. his band played, and I roadied, loaded gear in, and Kay, the owner, caught me drinking whiskey in there, and it was a beer bar, and boy, he chased me out and threatened to not let them play just because they were associated with me, and then
Yeah, I remember that.
But he
That's
loved. He loved us.
Yeah.
He loved it. I mean,
but I was
and
banned.
he always gave us beer to play because he wouldn't pay us
But
when we were underage.
But you couldn't
we never
smuggle
got
whiskey in because he wasn't getting a cut of it.
Yeah.
And for
That was it.
the next year, the next 2 years, if I came across him anywhere, he would just run after me, cussing and chase me off.
Well,
And then after that, it was all good again. I think he banned me twice from there.
I'm pretty sure we saw him walking through once, smoking weed out of a corncob pipe, though.
Yeah. Well,
We can, or some high quality oregano.
Right.
We can only speculate. I mean, Kay's one of the stars of the documentary, so
K is a rock star.
But how we met Dave, I met Dave first. We, because we were in the scene, and then, you go see bands playing stuff, but we also had an apartment that everybody came to. Not everybody, but, we had the party apartment kind of, and so they started showing up, and that's how Dave and I became friends, was downtown, when I was down there. And we just kind of clicked, and then met Terry through Dave, and just kind of we all started hanging out, and eventually I quit doing bands in the early 90s, 90, 91. We did the Outcast thing again briefly, but then we hung out, always went to their shows all the time, and we'd go see other bands around town, and, it was a fun time. It was different than now. I mean, it always changes, but right now you couldn't catch anybody on Riverside like that. I mean,
Well,
it
could be the same. I mean, if
it is.
there is no way that we could possibly grasp what 18-year-olds are doing now. I mean, late 40s. So it's is aware. We'd be aware of what they're doing as much as our parents were aware of what we were doing. I mean, there could be completely something. Whole new thing going on just like that, and it just because that's not on our radar. Of course, you had a network completely different back then. It was all flyers, word of mouth, the occasional phone call at your mom's house. Where you going to be? I'll try to find you. Yeah. Now you can pinpoint exactly where everybody is, so they have that over on us. But
I don't know. I think that's also kind of killed it a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, now every band, because there's also 10 times as many bands as there were back then, but every band can make an event, post it on Facebook, tag all their friends, and there's so much going on that, I think there's as much apathy at any particular show now as we had back then. It's just that back then, no one really knew about it, because unless they went by Starship and saw the flyer nailed up on the board outside, they had no idea what was going on.
yeah.
But
And then everybody has a record now, too, because they just recorded it in their room.
Right.
It was a big deal if somebody put something out back then. You had to work for it.
One of the things of the documentary is because there was so many bands, and some of them weren't around for a long time. Some of them were around for 6 months. But if you didn't have video, who had cameras then, and if you didn't go into the studio, who did that? I mean, that was $20 an hour back then.
Yeah.
Not many bands from back then have anything, so it was really hard to put in something for everybody that was worth mentioning. We've got flyers, so if somebody talks about one of the bands, maybe all we've got is a flyer with their name on it, showing that they played at Blue Grotto or something like that. Yeah, there's no audio, there's no video.
Yeah, the earlier stuff, it's even harder to come by. At least there was video cameras in ours, but Anthony Lookout, one of the guys from the New Mysterians, he actually had some great footage of them at Crystal Pistol and Blue Grotto. So it's gold footage we have, because other than that, people weren't carrying around cameras back then, video cameras especially.
Well, a VHS camera in 1990 was $600.
Yeah.
Well, talk about, you said you did some of the artwork and stuff. I mean, what is each one of you guys' roles in this? What did you handle and all that kind of stuff?
Bryan basically did everything.
He was the technological end of it for sure.
Bryan.
Yeah,
he shot it. The biggest, toughest part of it was going through. I can't imagine how many hours and
there's no
actually
narration.
Turning it into a story, turning it into a narrative. I mean,
but I've done it at work, so it just takes time. I mean, putting all the sound bites together with the music. There's no narration because that's kind of old hat. I mean, I'm not saying it's bad, but it's all sound bites and music. And then
just let that.
I wanted to do a voiceover, and I wouldn't let me.
Yeah. And also, Dave, once we did all the interviews and stuff to fill gaps, I knew we directed all the questions at Dave. So when you see his interview up, it's stuff we needed. You know, it's not a narrator, but you know what I mean. He would fill the
Connecting
gaps.
point A to B.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. So when I had gaps, it's like I wrote them all down. Then we went and did an interview with Dave, and it was able to fill and keep it, going. So
Yeah, I'm the historian in it.
yeah,
So that was basically my role. Is I would suggest we had a basic core group of people we knew we wanted to interview with some, I would go beyond that circle and we debate this and that, because I had a list of like 50, 60 people and he's like, well, we can only do so many because we're only going to use like a couple of minutes. In a couple of minutes, someone talking on a documentary like that feels a lot longer. You know what I mean? So, but we pared it down and I came up with a lot of people to interview and then I bugged them all. I'm the one like, I know 3 years ago you found this picture for us, but now do you have a picture of this?
yeah. It's hard to keep up because after you're going, usually you have a huge, like at work, you got several people working on it. Somebody does this and that, and it's all us. So it's like, okay, Dave, where's that flyer? Because a lot of the music tracks too, I have to play over the phone because back then they're Untitled 1, Untitled 2, Untitled, and it's like, well, hey, Terry, and he said, oh, that's a cover song because it was so, I couldn't tell. And so there's all that kind of stuff. And, always message it. The bands, everybody in this is really super cool. And, they'd always get back, say, yeah, that's that song from here or whatever. The name of it's this. Because you want to make the spelling right and all that stuff. You don't want any, got to be accurate.
And there's some that even the bands then had no idea what the titles were.
Yeah.
Well, it's only been 35 years since I heard that song.
And so it's called Jam in D or something like that.
Maybe you had a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, what did your running time end up being?
Right at 2 hours. It's like 2 hours and 40 seconds right at black at the end, right when it fades to black. So
Was
We
it
tried to
hard
get it
to get
under,
it to that point, or was it?
No, it was just going to be what it is. I didn't time it down. It was just as I
You weren't
went.
trying to get it.
No,
to
not an
2
exact
hours?
time. No, only on the credits because then I was like, okay, at least get kind of an exact time at the end. You know what I mean? It's like, but yeah.
Originally, we were trying to keep it at an hour because it's like, well, no one's going to want to sit through that because there's not just this one little era, and then it's like, well, let's go back a little bit farther now.
Yeah,
instead of
just
starting
at the
with the end of NOTA, it's like, why did NOTA do this? Who was before that? All the older stuff with the New Mysterians and found some old Joe Christ interviews, and it went all the way back to when the Sex Pistols played here. So actually, that's kind of the starting point.
Okay.
One of that in the beginning too on Facebook, on social media. Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
People are like, well, "Are you going to do this and this?" And it just got chaotic. In the
What about
beginning.
my band? What about my band?
Yeah,
What
we're
about
just
my
getting
band?
going.
It's like,
People
what
on
did
there
you do?
just,
You're a cover band. What the hell are you talking about?
That's the only nightmare because it's a necessary evil, but at the same time, man, it's like, geez, people chill.
Well,
We had an original. We wrote a song.
Yeah.
So we didn't interview everybody from every band. We cast a net and let the few tell the story for the many. Now the few is over 30 people, but then there's still the people that, they feel left out or, well, you didn't talk about my band. It's like, well, maybe I think your band is actually in it. We just didn't talk to you directly, you know.
We had people getting mad because they knew we weren't going to talk. We weren't going to mention it because Asylum and another band had this rivalry, I think. I don't know what it was exactly. But they're like, well, screw you guys, right off the bat. But then turns out people talk about them, so they're kind of in it. We've got pictures, we've got flyers. So we didn't tell them they're in it. But.
Well, then also when people would say that, I was like, well, what do you got? Or if it's not kind of in the music, I'm like, do you have footage of you playing at this specific club? Because not only do we talk about some bands, we have some bands featured, and then other bands, shout outs and that, and then we feature some of the main clubs throughout the years. So it's like any footage we got from those clubs is gold. Yeah, so if you got that, our Club Nitro section has a lot of footage of different bands that we don't really go into in the doc, but it just gets them a little shout out and that they're playing at Club Nitro. You see the classic Nitro backdrop, just to show the diversity Nitro had.
Yeah. Well, I did notice, like you mentioned Sex Pistols, and I think I saw some other stuff in that group over the past year. You guys focus on national acts that were playing these places as well, not just
It's
the
not
Tulsa
really
acts.
It's not really a focus. It's just like the Sex
a
Pistols
mention.
and Ramones. Yeah. Greg Sewell had some phenomenal pictures of Sex Pistols and Ramones. And they talked, because that's where the genesis of it all is. Yeah, and then I got some Channel 6. I've got a lot of stories from Channel 6 with permission. I got some people down there, but they're cool about letting use it. So I got like a little, but it just adds to the story. And we got like Keith Morris. He was in town with Off.
From the Circle Jerks.
Yeah, and Black Flag,
We're proving that Tulsa was legit, basically.
Yeah,
because someone played on a dirt
We just
floor.
wanted an outside perspective because
Somewhere.
he played here in '85 at the 424, which was downtown, and he once we told him, he remembered that. We brought him a picture because Dan Reif, one of the guys at Ock, had pictures of it, and but it's just a flavor, and he gave his perspective on Oklahoma during that time. Playing here, what it was, how we were perceived out, from other states.
And if we have pictures of some of those bigger bands at some of those clubs, like at the Crystal Pistol with the, Husker Du and the Descendants, or
we'll show
or the
them
Descendants
actually
were
here.
424, but our Black Flag at the Vortex or whatever, anything that kind of shows how we interacted with the outside world, that we weren't completely insular.
Yeah, a lot of people don't believe those bands actually came here. Because NOTA toured with Dead Kennedys, Husker Du, and
Yeah.
they played with
RKL. They played with RKL.
Oh, yeah.
Meat Puppets. They played with a lot of people, went on tour. They were, but yeah, it's not a focus, but they're in it because they played here. It's part of the scene, and that's what got people going.
And there's flyers showing that Flaming Lips played, but they wouldn't talk to us.
Yeah. Well, they played at Nitro, and I guess back then they weren't. The consensus is when they started off, like a lot of bands weren't that great.
After
No-
4
noise
years
punk.
of trying to get
They finally
it,
got
he-
back with this. He said he's not interested.
Yeah. It took him 4 or 5 years to say he's not interested.
And only because they're an Oklahoma City band, but they played at Nitro a lot back then. And
I think they played Crystal Pistol too, but
yeah, but they
they used to open for NOTA.
We always heard Wayne was cool about doing those interviews. We thought, okay, we'll ask him. And it took a few years, but he just, for whatever reason, didn't want to do
Well,
it.
he's so much about shameless self-promotion, really.
Yeah.
Look at his
That's
Instagram.
Terry
He doesn't
Waska.
shut up. Yes, this is Terry Waska talking crap.
Well, that brings up a question I wanted to ask. Was there, I guess besides Wayne, was there anybody you tried to get that you couldn't for any reason?
We had one guy that we won't name that was interviewed.
Are you talking about famous people?
No, just anyone
anybody,
from
really.
famous or from
We
here.
had one guy interviewed in it. The doc
We're
was
not going to say any
ready,
names because
and I called him to tell him it was almost out. Could he sign a release? And he asked to be removed, completely removed. And I said, "Well, what about your involvement in this and this?" So, well, leave that in there,
but it's like
but
can't
remove
because
me. And I'm like,
we
that
can't
doesn't make
because
any sense.
He
Right.
carried the,
I
we
guess-
really wanted him.
Witness protection was,
He was,
was
yeah,
a violation or something?
he was only in it a total of maybe 8 minutes, so I was able to get another interview, and it actually turned out a little better. But we'd still like to have him. But we had interviewed him like 6 years ago, and this was just earlier this year, right when I was finishing, and he had been in it. All that, so I had to go back and rip him out and do all this stuff. But we're using some of
He
the
got
stuff.
spooked by
I
release
think.
form, I guess. I don't know. It's like, well, okay.
Yeah, he talking to people so I even told him in a text that, hey, you don't have to sign a release form if we really want you in it, which is a leap of faith, but nothing.
He
So
just
that's the only problem we had. Otherwise, everybody's been really, good.
Yeah, and we got Tex Montana before she passed.
Yeah,
that's
like
6
2
months.
years.
Trailer. That's cool.
Yeah, she was a great interview, and it was like 2 or 3 years later than that. It was
I
sad.
think she died less than a year after that interview. She died pretty quick. I can't remember the timing, but it seemed like, wow, really? Because it seemed like, it was quick.
Yeah, it was sad. Didn't expect that.
She was very charismatic, she was good.
We have an old interview with Joe Danger, Joe Christ, whatever. He was in Los Reactors. He passed away in 2007, but we had an interview they let us use, and we were able to put that in, which is really cool because he was a big part of the scene back then. He's one of the main driving
early
forces. Yeah, he got the Blue Grotto going. As far as he didn't start it, but he started getting the bands in there and stuff, and that's told in the doc of it too. So
Generated the early punk scene. Curated, that's what they call it now,
yeah,
right?
curating. Yeah,
I curated the shows there.
So what's probably one of your favorite parts of it or favorite interviews that you got?
I guess I should say all of them.
Wow.
Since we're being recorded.
yeah.
Since I'm sitting here.
Or most memorable, maybe.
One of the, there's a lot of things, but I would say almost the Baby M part because you got a lot of different aspects to it, and it's real quirky and cool. And Brandon Holder, who's our drummer, and he was Leon Russell's drummer the last 10 years before he passed. And but he was also in Pitbulls, right?
Yeah, he was a later.
After Memento.
But that, I think we both, all the stories are great, but for that one, it has so many like ups and downs, and it's so weird because they had like a cult type house, and they have blood rituals to be in the band and all this stuff.
Yeah,
this is for real. Yeah. And then Comstock, he passed away in 2004 from a drug overdose, I think. And you got the whole spectrum there. But yeah, I don't know if it's favorite, but it is definitely one of the more different stories in there for sure.
Yeah.
So, and the lady that has the old Baby M house, I think she owns Empire now.
Yeah,
I think you were saying.
Yeah, somebody told me that.
Yeah,
I'm like,
they had
the
a-
house is still there. It's at 15th and Newport.
It was called the House of Suffering, and it was a
We have video
squat
of it.
house. So we got a video of people like sleeping in the closets. And,
Well, they're
some-
talking about what Debbie Gibson. They had a Debbie
Yeah.
Gibson CD for some reason.
Yeah, some of that video though, man, it was like we couldn't put in. Yeah, but Brandon had that for us too. He gave us a bunch of cool Baby M stuff. So, and so did Brian Durr and a few others. They had some.
we got some rare NOTA footage, which is pretty cool. And
Yeah, Bruce came up with that. Bruce is the bass player, and he's been real helpful in the doc too. He's one of our historical guys, and he what about 6-7 months ago, or I don't know if it's been that long. He said, "Hey, I got to film this really good footage." Man, it was
went
great.
through my storage unit and found this.
It was great. Yeah, so we popped that in, and so it's great that we waited this long because people just suddenly come out of the woodwork and be like, "Hey, I got this and that," and
Yeah.
you know,
Well, you kind of mentioned that before Dave got here. Like you said, there were several guys you would call. You know,
oh
you
yeah,
had questions
yeah,
like who were all the guys that you
like
reached out to?
Greg Sewell, Anthony Lookout,
Roger Scott.
yeah, Roger Scott,
Greg Sewell was the
Greg Sewell.
promoter at the Crystal Pistol.
and Bruce Hendrickson from NOTA. Sometimes Dennis Duesenberg too, and
Plays No Faded.
yeah, and then Chad for the recent, like Chad Malone and a few others. But we kind of know the recent. I mean, our history, but we'd still call, ask people, hey, and sometimes Chris Dunn. They were in the kids together. So, but yeah, those guys were gold because they knew everything from back then. So we knew some, but when in doubt, call them or email, message them or let them hear a song or whatever. And so yeah, we wanted it to be as accurate as possible. So they were really, really cool.
I think timeline-wise, Chad's band, Brother Inferior, was, in terms of years active, was the latest going band. And so they were kind of ruled the mid to late 90s from what I could tell around here. And there was probably a whole scene at that point that we don't go into because we're wrapping it up then. They're mainly included because they came out of Chad's earlier bands and they started then. But their whole story goes into 2000s or whatever, so that would be like for volume 2 or something. But
Yeah. We had to cut it off somewhere.
yeah, we're like, okay, we've covered like almost 20 years worth of stuff here. I think we're good. 2 hours. I mean, it's going to be a Ken Burns series after that.
Yeah, we didn't do every single band either. It was mainly the big ones, the ones that made an impact, and we do talk about other ones too. I mean, people are like, oh. But yeah, so
But there's still going to be a lot of butthurt when it comes out. I know.
you always get that though. People that love it or hate it, or hey, you didn't put this or that, and it's like, okay, fine, but but I think we did it as well as we could. I think it wasn't just our opinions. We actually sought out other people's and stuff just to make sure.
We started with what we knew and what we liked, and then let them talk about what they know and what they liked.
Yeah.
So it was like a flowering.
Well, was there anything, in the making of it that you learned that you didn't know? Like, because I'm sure there's, probably knew everything. Was there anything you just,
Plenty of stuff from the early scene
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We got to know Dale Lawton pretty well, and I didn't know him beforehand at all. And
He's another guy we looked.
he has a
talked to
very
lot. He helped
interesting
us out a lot.
story. Yeah, he went off to L.A. to become a sound engineer and ended up becoming real good buddies to this day with Butch Vig and recorded all sorts of different acts from like what he said, Soul Asylum to
Dave Navarro and
Bad Brains, and,
Yo-Yo Ma.
Yeah,
Don't read. Seriously,
Yeah.
he has this whole. I mean, works with a lot of bands out there. There's
and
a studio
when
in-
you get to know him, he was like King Charisma back in the day. It seemed like he was probably a lady killer,
Yeah.
He was like the front dude. He still looks the part now, and he's older than we are.
Yeah,
He looks the part more than we do. That's for damn sure.
yeah, he does. Yeah,
Well, so how is this? I mean, I don't know if you want to give stuff away, but like, how's this laid out? Is it like just from one of those docs where it goes from interview to interview, or is it like a narration or anything like that?
no narration whatsoever. It's all sound bites and music, and it carries the whole thing. And that's kind of the way you do it now. Narration,
Yeah.
it's okay. It's kind of old hat, but Most of the docs now, if you watch them, even the punk rock docs we've watched, they're all that way too. And that's not why, but that's just the best way to do it. And it starts off, Sex Pistols all the way through. I mean, we even talk. What else? I'm trying to think of.
It's generally chronological, but it's interwoven where we kind of bounce around. So, I mean, Pitbull's on crack when it comes to band features. They're the last ones near the end.
Yeah, because everybody was going at the same time, so you can't say this band came out on this date and then this one on this one. So you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So there wasn't really a method to the order at the end. It just felt right because it was like incestual back then.
Yeah,
Right, and then one band-
a lot of bands were concurrent, and
One band, Asylum splits up, and Dave and Stacy go to Bunnies and Doom, and I went to Pitbulls on Crack, so that was kind of a lead-in to those.
Yeah, so that's why. And
then Steve Ray married his sister, and then me and Trev from Pitbulls married sisters, and that's how incestuous this thing is.
yeah, and then we did, what is, oh God, I'm brain dead. Before Baby M, we did, the Illegitimate Sons of Jackie O are in it. That's Dan Rife. And they're one of the featured bands. They didn't have a whole lot of stuff. And that's the thing is I tried to use as much stuff from everybody as possible. And we would just bug the crap out of people. It's like, got any more video? And some people, they don't want to go through boxes, and some of them did. It just depends. They don't know where it's at or whatever. It's been, But yeah, it's once it gets to the there's a whole kind of area on venues. Once it goes to our era, we kind of go over some of the venues. There's a gray area where it's overlapped because mid '80s was for the thrash stuff and that. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So some of the venues were kind of in the mid '80s. So I had to put it there together best I could because you know what I'm saying.
I know exactly.
Yeah, because Nitro technically started in 84, so it was more of our gender, but at the tail end of theirs. You know what I mean? There's crossover.
Yeah.
So that was a tough part, but at the same time, I think it flows. So I hope.
So did you just have on the early stuff where you weren't as completely familiar with it? Did you have anybody look over it before you decided it was the final?
Yeah, we've
product?
had people. Yeah, we ran. Well, yeah, we've had Bruce
from NOTA came by.
Months ago. Yeah. And we played it for some show and told them and stuff.
We haven't played it start to finish for anybody but us. But
yeah. So they're cool with it.
We've kind of talked about getting a really small place and inviting a bunch of people that are into it for fact checking and all that. But I'm kind of afraid of too many opinions.
Yeah, because I think we fact checked a lot throughout the whole thing. So I think we're good on that. So at that point, you would get 30. You just never know. You open up a can of worms. So, but after the viewing, if there's something glaring that come up, it's like I can still fix it. It's not like it's going mainstream right now.
It's more like, is this absolutely wrong? Because everybody remembers things their own way.
Right.
Yeah.
Because one guy, when he saw it, we showed him a little segment, and he was like, well, actually, it happened like this. I'm like, is generally this true? This did happen, though. Here, yes. Okay, well, outside of a small circle, no one's going to care about that much detail.
And again, it's opinions, because somebody else had a different opinion.
Yeah, you can't go off in the weeds too much, because we're covering such a huge time.
And there are many stories. There are many stories within a larger story. So the details of each little mini story, I mean, we're going for generalities sometimes, not the specific details. Like, did this person do this? Okay, that's what we
don't care if somebody whispered in his ear the night before about it. And, you know what I mean? If he actually did it, then that's what matters,
So we got, that's the thing, take your knocks, take your hits. But it's like, is this generally what happened? Because part of it is like, there was a lot of times there wasn't anything going on. We're not talking about that. We're kind of creating the myth. It's like we're taking the interesting stuff from 20 years and condensing it. We don't want the boring stuff. We want the stuff that's fun, and we want the fun. Some of the people we'd interview would just have this little checklist of facts in their heads, and that's what they wanted. On January 6th, 1980... this person tuned a guitar. And I'm like, no, tell us about what happened when you guys met, or give us a story. And then some people are like, deer in the headlights. I think that punk rock was a significant reaction to the atmosphere in Tulsa. And
That didn't happen.
We
a
want
lot.
your
There's
stories,
one or
just
two.
occasionally,
Yeah,
what
one or
I'm saying,
two.
that's
Well,
like...
you have to loosen them up a little bit. In an interview, some people are nervous and you have to loosen them up. And I've done that for years. So it's like, okay, so you start chatting with them and they get over it. But a couple people came prepared. No, it wasn't bad. It was just they knew, like, they had to say something that was, like, scripted. Or it's like, no. Just talk to us. And, we eventually got it out of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Get the lighting right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Lighting's not good for me.
No.
That actually
No names.
That happened on one. That's it.
That was probably Steve Ray, right?
No, that's the funny thing. Is like my interview was really early on, which is fine because my beard was a lot darker then. It wasn't as gray. But then I see the Pitbulls interview and I'm like, oh, they actually talking about that? Because I got something to say now. But it's like, oh, too late. I can't.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of it, it's like talking about that first Pitbull interview. It's amazing when you take this long to make a documentary how things change. Like, unfortunately, someone like, Tex passing, never getting to see it is a bummer. Steve, we thought it'd be funny to interview Steve and Andy in Steve's mom's backyard because she had a pool. So let's interview him in front of the pool. And he goes like, I'm so glad you did that, Dave, because that pool is no longer there. It got damaged from a storm and they just filled it.
Yeah, we interviewed Tex at Crystal Pistol 2.0, and it's now Yeti, and it's gone. And then
he did a drive-by at an old house place that Chad used to run called the Central Underground. That building's been razed now. It's no longer
So we actually
there.
got that. I shot, put the GoPro on, drove around town. There's a lot of GoPro shots. So.
And then we did a lot of interviews on 6th Street at various parts that have now been gentrified.
Yeah, and the thing is, I didn't want the interviews to look too pretty. Sometimes we had to do them inside, so set up lights. But for the most part, I don't know if you ever saw this Dogtown. That I want it to look like that. Where you're just outside and it's just great. Maybe some iconic things like the Driller or something. But then just like brick it, we'd always find these cool like ugly areas. You want it to be like immediate, kind of handheld, not real pretty, and all that stuff. We wanted to that's why I was kind of patterning it after when I started it on the interviews.
Yeah.
I'm in front of the porn store.
Yeah.
You
There
and
you go.
Stacy.
There you go. But yeah, we just took them when we could get them. We wanted to look kind of immediate, like man on the street kind of thing, and woman on the street, whatever. But that's a news term, man on the street. So that's how old that is. But
Person on the street.
yeah, but we tried to do them like
Your
unique.
sexism makes me want to vomit.
We didn't want to get them like necessarily in a pretty setting, and just what I mean, because it's punk rock. We wanted to look like outside, gritty, and all that stuff, but. So a few of them we had to set up because of the weather. So it's like, okay, let's light this guitar behind him and make it look, So, but.
Or were any of you said like the mini stories on specific bands, were any of them so interesting that you think you could do a full doc on them later?
Oh, yeah, by far. Yeah, that's the thing. I had to really limit myself when I was putting this together because I'm like, man, there's so much more to tell, but got to cut that out. It's going to be too long, I didn't really have a time limit on each band by any means. Just when it played out, it played out. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you got to realize. It's like, okay, move on. You can't stay
My
on
bands,
one.
of course.
Oh yeah.
And we tried to. And the thing is, we put people who had studio tracks, bands, try to put like a little play 20 seconds of each clip roughly, and do like a little scene. Or I'll show you a little bit when we're done, but. Just to make it interesting. Like, some of them are funny, and, like, some of them are, like, they had the same war all the time, bunnies, and I found this video of army men being blown up and stuff, that type of thing. And,
little
we don't want to give away everything.
music,
but
little
stuff like
music
that, yeah.
videos. I mean,
almost like miniature, but you can't play too long of a track, because it just gets, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the part I really wanted to keep going on. I'm like, yeah, it'll just drag at that point. You got to limit, because you're doing so many bands, you got to kind of cut it off somewhere. And we have live performances too, mixed in. So,
yeah, but I think, maybe not a 2-hour thing, but NOTA itself, its whole history could warrant a nice hour-long one, especially if you went into and you were able to interview all the people they knew, like Bob Mould from Husker Du and Jello Biafra and all those people that would be very interesting, just because of how they tied in and how they were nationally known. If you get the book American Hardcore, their logo's in it. I mean, they're referred to in the book. And so, I'm a big fan, so that would be interesting to me. Some of the other bands would, just because of the weird things, like he was saying, the life of Mike Comstock from Baby M would be worthy of a documentary, because that guy was a charismatic outlaw, to simplify it. You know, to simplify it, he was a different dude. He just kind of lived life on his own terms and died.
How many songs are represented, do you know?
Oh, God.
Wow.
A lot. I credited every single one of them, though. Yeah, that was the hard part. The credits were bitch. It's like, God damn. It's like, all right, what's this song? And wait a day. Sometimes people, get back with you whenever, but I don't know. I mean, and I used all the music in this, whether it's a track or whatever, soundtracking music. I used all the music from that genre for soundtracking.
From the era.
And era, not genre. Sorry, thanks. I'm tired. but yeah, it's because it was more than. It wasn't just all punk rock, so it is a genre. Some of it was like Baby M stuff, which they were, but like other bands like Brian Simmons, he wasn't punk rock, he was reggae, but he had some great music, and we're using some of that to soundtrack and some others just to, underneath stuff.
And then of course we play some of the other ones that weren't very hard, or you wouldn't think of punk rock at all, to contrast what was going on and the fact that these bands all interacted. Like the Jacks was an early power pop band, and they played the first night of the Blue Grotto with NOTA. So we contrast today, maybe at the time it was a little more accepted since it was both fringe, but it seems like, wow, when we hear it's like these two bands play together, completely different.
But then again, when we were playing in Asylum back in late 80s and early 90s at Club Nitro, it was 3 bands. You really didn't set up your own show. It would be us and Baby
right.
M and Decadent Lament or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it was always a big mix, because even then, just like in the early thing, if it wasn't Kansas or Boston, it was punk.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing even for our early days. The scene was so small that everybody went to everybody else's shows, even if it wasn't anything you were necessarily into, because Club Nitro was the place to be, or because Tucka or wherever, That's what we did, and all the shows were this weird mix and match. So, the Jackson NOTA, I guess it made sense.
Like
we probably played with weirder shit.
Yeah.
Jackson NOTA is like Beach Boys and Sabbath playing together.
True.
Yeah.
It was. If you listen to it, it's kind of...
Well, with Asylum, when we got out of high school and we were getting our baby steps as a speed metal band, and when we started, we were just trying to grow our hair long and be a hard rock band. Heavy metal, mid-80s, whatever that, not glam, but it wasn't until the end of high school that we started getting into the thrashier stuff like Metallica and Slayer and Anthrax. But at that time, all the heavy metal bars were all 21 and up. There was one called Rockers that you only had to be 18.
Hair metal.
Yeah, and that was, yeah. You had to play a lot of covers to play that whole scene. But, so we just went down to Nitro, and Kay would have anybody that's starting out if they're doing their own thing, and then we just, wherever we could go, wherever we could get a show, and whoever seemed like they were popular and had an instant crowd we wanted to play with.
also getting Hedberg helped.
Yeah, getting Hedberg.
Not saying Derek was. I don't.
He was our drummer.
He made him more punk rock because he was in Disease and some.
Antisocials.
Yeah.
If we go down and play with Baby M, see Baby M. Of any band I've ever seen in Tulsa, they brought out the best looking women.
Yeah, that's by far.
Gosh, yeah. You always wanted to play with Baby M.
Or go to their shows.
We did not bring women.
Yeah, well, you get 3 or 4. And then there'd be, 3 or 4 and then 10 guys.
That was usually our crowd.
Don't let your girlfriends and wives hear this part. Don't tell them. We're not on that podcast.
Our biggest investment, all of our shows, I just remember being disappointingly small. There was a few that wasn't. We played, the first time DRI played here, they canceled, and we went down to the Canes and plastered flyers all over the place, and that whole crowd for DRI came down to Nitro. And luckily we got video of that, so it looks like we were popular.
Oh, we were huge, dude. What are you talking about?
Didn't
I just say we're creating the myth here? We were huge.
Well, you've got this preview screening coming up. What else is, in store for this thing? What do you want to do with it?
Well, we're doing a preview screening, not a premiere, because we entered it in several festivals and found out through Chuck Fox's circle that, you're ineligible for festivals, if you have a premiere and distribution like DVDs, so we're holding off on all that. We should know this fall. We may know as early as this month.
Okay.
But they have several months to let you know. So once we do this, we'll play the waiting game with the festivals. If we get one, that's super. God, that's great, man. I mean, then we'll go from there.
Yeah.
But if we don't, then we're going to go back to the circle, do official premiere, maybe a week run, look for, distribution on our own or whatever. But we're crossing fingers for the festival. So.
And we entered a few overseas.
Barcelona and
Warsaw.
Yeah.
There's in Poland. There is an
I don't know if I found
American. You didn't?
I don't know.
There's an
I'll have
American
to remember.
film festival, just American films, but in Poland.
Wow.
So, and the entry fee is free, so I'm feeling pretty good about it.
And the
Plus,
circle-
I'm a quarter Polish, so
I
I'm
totally
a ringer here.
I totally thought you were joking about the Polish.
No,
Because I was like, enter Barcelona, because I was like, I want to go there. And he's like, or if we can't do that, let's do Poland. I'm like, oh,
Hopefully,
that's not at the top of my vacation list,
know, it was
but that would be cool.
I found it on this website. It's like the top, I don't know, 25 festivals worth spending the money on, and that one was actually on it, and it was free. So
Yeah.
and the circle
that's why it's worth the
cool.
money, probably. But,
Circle said they're doing one next year, so he said it could be in that. So maybe they got more lax rules or something. I don't know.
we entered Sundance, but we're that's kind of our long shot.
That's the flair. Yeah.
So I guess you kind of, like you said, you got to wait till you hear from all these before you decide on
Right.
everything else. Like,
Yeah.
Right,
it's
we
gonna
planned
be
on the premiere.
distributed and all that stuff.
Yeah, this is the first solo thing for me, so I didn't know that until I went down to meet with the circle, and Chuck educated me. He goes, "Oh, you don't want to do that because you'll be an L." He explained the whole thing to me. So I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." So he goes, "We'll call it a preview, and that's what it is. It's more of a private preview thing, not a premiere. So we're not accepting any money from it. We're letting because also they're nonprofit, so they're getting all the ticket sales. Usually they split it, but we're like, no. One reason we can't take it because it would be considered ticket sales."
Right.
And so, and another, they're being cool. I mean, it's a cool place, so it's not worth, let them have it all,
Yeah, they're having a whole event.
Yeah, they're doing, an event.
Bringing, what is it, the Tulsa Film?
Yeah, I haven't looked. I've been so busy.
Oh,
I
it's
haven't looked
I
yet.
can't even remember. There's a reception at 6, and there'll be things going on. And on the October 6th, when our movie screens, and then the documentary will screen at 7, and then we'll do a Q&A after that.
And then an after party at Blackbird, which is the old Nitro.
Right.
Yeah.
I saw that.
So is the Q&A the three of you? Or?
Yeah.
We're just gonna have Terry answer all of them.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna say I don't know.
Yeah, and the thing with
I'm
Terry,
gonna walk in with a bandage on my head.
with Terry, I'd run into things like this Boomer Theater and a few other things. I don't give her the whole thing, but Terry would illustrate if we couldn't find a picture of it, because you also have that permission. You can't just grab any random picture and put it in. You got to, dot your I's and cross your T's. But he did a few illustrations that we needed that really were, I don't want to name them because it's like, okay, but you know what I mean. He did quite a few.
Mm-hmm.
He also did the cover art and the logo, the flyer you see, all the titles and stuff, and
Yeah, there was
then cutouts for 3Ds and all that ton of stuff.
Yeah,
Goes on and on.
anytime there's a picture where the background's doing something different than the subject, that was just Photoshop stuff. I'd layer it all up and send it to him.
Now put it in After Effects and make it weird.
Move.
And what was it? Somebody was telling a story about some skinheads, and Brian used a really old drawing I had done for one of Dave's poetry books, and I thought the drawing was terrible now, and I'm like, nope, don't put that in. Let me redraw it. So I redrew it, and I drew,
they were really cool.
I drew a bunch of different skinheads, and I put them all in Photoshop layers and sent that to him. And I put a picture of a bar scene, which was, what bar was it?
I think it was
It was something from the archives.
Icon, I think, or something. I don't
Yeah,
remember.
so-
I made it look nondescript, so
Yeah.
nobody knows. Yeah.
So he was able to kind of animate that to go with the story.
Yeah, made the characters move. And
Yeah, it's simple stuff, but it looks funny. It's great. I mean, the skinheads are. I mean, Terry can really draw a skinhead.
No, I just look in the mirror these days.
Yeah,
That's right. Yes.
So was there ever any thought of putting on like a show, like a concert?
Yeah. We talked about that, but it's Dave. I defer that to Dave because
That had to be quite an undertaking.
That would, I mean, yeah, VR. I mean, earlier on when we were working on this, I thought about it all the time, and then there's some sort of inertia that takes a hold of the old band people. It's like, all you guys live here. You could certainly do something, but then you just, I don't know. Maybe if we do something later on after, if we screen it again after all the, film festival stuff, we could look into tying that all together, because that would, maybe give another incentive for maybe people to come see it again who come to this one. But it would just kind of have to hinge on who wants to do it, because you're going to get what, I'll quote Jeff Klein in it, the state fair versions of bands where it's just one dude and somebody else playing, You want to get it as close to authentic as you can, and
even with Tones, with that many bands, you could provide one back line, and then NOTA gets up and does a couple, and then Ill Fated gets up and does a couple, but everybody's got such a distinct sound, their bass tone, their guitar tone, that you've already lost it.
So, that's a possibility for later on down the line, but, in my mind, I'd love to do it, but I just don't know if I can. It's a lot of work, especially to work with all those kind of bands. I mean, I've done it for years. So that's why we don't have any live music scheduled for the after party, because we figured that we'll put on a soundtrack of bands, and then, because we figure it's mostly going to be one of people that haven't seen each other in years that want to just keep talking and don't want to be drowned out. They want to reminisce and catch up like a high school reunion.
Yeah, if we were going to do that, we were talking about doing it the week before or something, do it the weekend before, but, until we get, this is just a preview thing, so we're like, well, let's wait and get through, like Dave said, maybe do that at a later time. It'd still be a good thing to do, we just have to really kind of whittle down who wants to do it.
So, kind of off subject, but are you any closer to your retrospective you were talking about putting together?
Yeah, I don't know if it'll be vinyl, but I've got a test master supposed to be coming in the mail, so I'll put it out in some form soon. I've narrowed it down to 30 songs. So yeah, I hope they just. I don't realize how long I've been talking about it till Facebook memories say 5 years ago, and then it brings up some memory where I'm talking about it. I'm like, yeah, it's almost like the documentary's like, I just need to finish that and get it out, and this whatever happens after that is the next thing, But I'm waiting. Actually, I had to do a test master, and I'm seeing how it turned out, because it's from 20 some odd years of different recordings, and they're all going to sound different, but you want them to sound somewhat cohesive.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if I've just listened to them too much that I can't finish. It's like, it's never quite right. But yeah, hopefully I'll send you one. It should be done soon. I'm done. I just got to be done with it.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, it's been a while.
Well, Dave's always done things where, back when we were in college together, we were talking, I was taking photography, and his brother-in-law showed me the book Tulsa. Have you seen that one? It's old, from early 60s, kind of the underground greaser scene.
By Larry Clark?
Yeah, the director Larry Clark, but he's from Tulsa, and it's, these greasers, and, showing this guy, they're digging a bullet out of some guy's ass after he just robbed a liquor store, and they're showing people shooting up and all that kind of stuff. So, and that was 1963 in Tulsa, so it's kind of this really gritty underground. But I had this camera at the time, and I was like, oh, I want to go out and shoot all these bands, and someday we'll put out this big great, black and white art tabletop book of the bands, and that never happened. But that actually turned into Dave going back and getting these recordings from all these other people. And so he's put out, Rhythm of Damage and these other
Welcome to Tulsa,
these old anthologies.
Cops back in the day. So.
Yeah, which were just, a lot of it was current bands going back to, old Los Reactors and stuff like that. So, Dave's always been trying to, curate the music. Yeah. There's always projects,
Tulsa's Dave Grohl.
Yeah. Terry has to probably grimace a little bit when he sees an email from me. What's he want me to do now? What's he want me to do now? Can you do a cover for me? Can you do a flyer for me? It's got to look good. I can't do it. It's got to look good.
I know you were probably joking when you said part 2, but is that something you guys have considered at all, or
I don't
down
know.
the line? Or is that just
I think there's so much stuff that it is getting missed just because you can't put everything in it. I mean, like we were talking earlier, the actual like metal thrash scene gets kind of skipped because it was sort of from a different place than the pit bulls and the bunnies and that sort of metal-y stuff. I think it would be cool to someday just put out a book of photography of and you can put everybody in there that way, everybody gets a shout out. If you were, played a couple of shows, as long as you were an original band and you were on the scene for a while, I think that would be cool to do. As far as a part 2 on a documentary, it'd be great. But, this one wound up expanding so much from its original focus that, it contains its own prequel.
Yeah, no kidding. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
And, even though, we're still playing, we're still in bands, it's, I kind of think after that whole post-punk era, it's sort of, all of a sudden everybody was in a band and
And are we the right people to tell that
Exactly.
story?
Yeah, I was going to say, that's the thing. Maybe I definitely want to do something after this, but right now we just got done, so we're going to wait.
And this one took a long time.
Yeah, so it was really, this is one of the most, hands down, the most comprehensive thing I've ever done. So I do want to do something after this, but yeah, I think Dave's right. Let maybe somebody in that generation do it, because they probably have a better thumb on it than we would.
I think there's different scenes that would merit a documentary. I think, the early, electronic industrial stuff could be interesting,
Yeah, and we had a lot of that here then.
Yeah, we did. And, I mean, that...
Painted Orange and Red Groove, going way
up
back.
through...
Yeah, there was a ton of other bands back then that weren't in here. Not that we didn't like them, they just weren't in that genre, I mean... But yeah, there's a whole, alternative or whatever they call it,
Yeah, the 90s alt-rock scene. But at that point is what I tried to point out. The alternative rock was it wasn't really alternative, because at that point, by the mid-90s, when you had, Z104 come out being the Edge and all that, and
when
it was mainstream. It was, Green Day was mainstream. Offspring was mainstream, or, Stone Temple Pilots was considered alternative, but that's about it. That was like the lover boy of the 90s.
Yeah.
It's not saying whether or not it's bad or good, but it's.
Well, that's putting down Loverboy, though.
It became a whole different thing, It wasn't. The internet made everybody in a band, and that's what I noticed at the time, because it's like when we started out, it would be, and you have a house party and people are sharing this little 50-watt PV. And then, by near the end of the Bunnies, all these bands that are like 5-10 years younger than I am, they're coming out with their parents are a lot hipper than mine were, and they already have sweet pro stacks.
Oh, yeah.
And, and they're getting that kind of, we're going to put you on Edgefest and all that stuff. It's a whole different thing. Not saying it's worse. I mean, there could have been great bands, but it's just a different thing than what we did and what we experienced.
Well, there was one band, even in... was it the mid-90s, the Mantras, and they were good bands, kind of a hippie vibe, and didn't they spend $50,000 on their recording? Some
I heard it was like $10,000.
Wasn't Pete in there?
I heard 50.
Oh.
Regardless, 10,000.
Yes, Pete.
Even if that's what it was.
That's still insane.
That's insane. Yeah.
I had a lot of guys two guys that had played in the Bunnies of Doom at different times. And here's an interesting story, because I was asking, Steve Beard was the drummer of the Mantras. And the guy who put all that money down was the singer, who dropped out of the band something like not long after their CD came out. They were one of the first rock bands. They were kind of early 90s, because I remember them being one of the first bands in town to have a CD. Like, wow, you're on a CD? That's great. But he said the singer got lost in Alaska and is presumed dead.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what Steve told me. And, I don't know when Steve's pulling my leg or not, because he's got a different sense of humor, but that's what he told me.
Who's the singer? Or can we not say the name?
I don't remember his name. Okay. I didn't know him. I never met him. I knew all the rest of them quite well. I mean, I grew up with the bass player, Chris Foster, kind of, and he's busy in all sorts of bands these days. But yeah, the Mantras, they were kind of, they had that, wasn't so much, they had that psychedelic look, like a lot of those English bands like Stone Roses or something, you know what I mean? Were Stone Roses English?
Yes.
Yeah.
What did you call that scene? I don't know.
I don't know. Hippie, trippy,
English
groove.
genre.
Kind of hippie, but not super mainstream. You know, stuff they played on 120 minutes back in the day.
Cool, man. Well, we appreciate you guys' time.
Yeah, great.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having
Thank
us.
you very much.
It was awesome.
This is it's kind of a generation or two before me and him really start paying attention to it. So I'm looking forward to just kind of learning a lot of it.
No, that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, we caught the we told him when we had him on, we saw Bunnies of Doom several times and
Oh, yeah.
Pitbulls on Crack, but it was just kind of like the early to mid 90s was all we got to catch,
You got the end of it then, pretty
Yeah.
kind of, yeah.
Well, if you like a band like Pitbulls on Crack, they had basically 4 bands worth of members.
Yeah.
And like 4 different identities through the time they went. The only guy that was there beginning to end
Trev.
was Trev Heiner. And then they started off,
Skate punk.
it was like a skate punk band, had a different singer, had a different everything.
Tulsa Skate Crew.
Yeah, a couple of guys were in a band called Tulsa Skate Crew. And then, they like the rhythm section, and then they joined up with Andy Williams and Trev and the singer Eamon. And then Eamon split, and they replaced the drummer. And then Terry joined him after Asylum broke up, and so that was almost like part Mark II. If they were Deep Purple, it would be Mark II.
That was kind of the
Yeah.
punk metal crossover.
Yeah, then
era.
there's getting a little more metal. And then they had when the Brandon Holder era when he was on drums, and they did a whole overhaul then, and they were kind of like the mid-tempo groove helmet kind of metal.
Yeah.
And then then they changed over completely again. And Bunnies of Doom kind of did that too, because there was a Bunnies of Doom before I joined. But it's
We saw them at the Beehive, the other original Beehive.
in the original Beehive.
Yeah, I remember that.
But so if you just know Pitbulls on Crack from the end,
There's no telling.
you wouldn't. That's just. Well, why are they even in a punk rock documentary? This is just as heavy metal can be. But if you see it, they were totally like a skatecore band or something in the early days.
Yeah.
I did play the last 3. So at the end of Pitbulls, literally when they broke up, Larry Schaefer called the next day and said, "Hey, do you guys want to headline the Halloween Freakers Ball?" So they called me up and they called that lineup. And they're like, "Do you want to do this?" We said, "Sure." We had one practice the night before and we went on and did it.
That would be a finger quotes classic lineup.
Right. The
The 92 through 94 lineup, would you say? Or did you hang, were you in
92 and a half through.
almost 95?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't remember. I think it was 91 through 93.
Man, that's what's the evolution, because it changed, our generation, when I first met my buddy Mike, he was listening to punk rock, but also he put in Megadeth and Metallica. And so that's where it was going to the heavy, it all just kind of morphed and changed. And there were still a couple of traditional, mainly Chad at the time.
Chad kept it true.
Yeah, he was the one that kept the tradition, but all the other ones it just morphed into that. And now it's gone back now. There's a bunch of young bands the last 10, 15 years that...
There's a lot. There's a
Yeah,
big
they're doing the old
hardcore
school
scene
type stuff
popping up
again,
now.
so it all in cycles, it all
I
happens.
saw a band from Oklahoma City, and they were kids, and they were doing the English ska punk thing, which blew my mind. They were actually really good.
Yeah, I went to some punk show once, and this dude had an old school suicidal patch. I'm like, did you get that from your dad? How old are you?
By the way, Dave discovered there's salt in Dasani.
Yeah,
Discovered what?
There's salt in Dasani.
that's salt water.
Oh,
so
really?
if you're looking to quench your thirst, it's not going to do
They're
it.
making you drink more Dasani.
When I see
He told me that, and I was like, really?
disaster relief people, Coca-Cola shipping down cases of Dasani, it's you might want to cook your spaghetti in that. But that's going to dehydrate you. It's just to make you keep drinking and drinking.
My dad told me one point, he used to work for Coke. He said it was just from the Houston tap.
It says
system.
salt added for taste on there.
Houston water supply.
I know this till a couple of months ago. I was like,
It's very dry up in Colorado, and I was going to go on a little hike. My brother lives up there. We went back up to visit, and so me and my boy, we stopped off and well, let's get some water because dehydrate it real quick. And so I showed up a couple of Dasanis, and my brother's grandson was like, "Yeah, that's salt water, dude." And I'm like, "Oh my God, you're right." So just swish and spit. Anytime you feel thirsty,
Got cut in your mouth.
if you're not, but it's
good for
I also
canker
saw
sores.
after that tornado hit 41st in Yale, the guy in Reesers was like, "Oh, they're laboring in this hot weather. We're going to cases of Dasani.
By the way, if you want more, we're right over here.
Yeah.
And open for business.
I gotta have another. I'm so thirsty."
No water will do. Just Dasani.
Yeah.
There you go, Bryan, Dave, and Terry Waska. 3 guys behind Oil Capital Underground. I know there was obviously more people involved, but it was an honor to have these 3 guys. I think
Definitely.
this is our first Emmy-winning guest on this
Yes,
podcast.
it is. Yeah.
Unless I've missed something with another guy, you know. I don't know. Maybe Shooter Jennings won an Emmy.
You never know.
Yeah. He could have, because he did the music for that show, The Ranch. Anyway, this is totally off subject.
I don't. Rein it back in, Trent. Come on.
Right. Old Capitol Underground, The Evolution and Genesis of Punk Rock in Tulsa. Preview screening next week, October 6th at the Circle Cinema. I'm actually going to be out of town, unfortunately, but I know you're going to be there.
I will be there. I can't wait.
Yeah, I hope other people... Yeah, and another thing to point out is after this interview, they showed us clips.
Yeah, that's right.
And it wasn't just clips. He showed us literally probably 15 to 20 minutes worth of stuff from this, sections of it. And it was as interesting and as cool as it was built up in my head to be.
Exactly. I mean, I think I've said a few times, I can't wait to see this thing.
Right. So yeah, it'll probably, once they get past, the film festival season and get a preview screening, I mean, this thing should be out for anyone, I would think, within the next 6 months probably. So
Yeah.
Definitely be on the lookout for this. Even if you're not a huge fan of punk, I can't imagine that you wouldn't enjoy it, because we've talked about many times, any music documentary that's done well is interesting.
It is.
No matter what the genre is.
That's right. That's right. This was quite an undertaking for these guys, and I'm glad it's finally coming out.
Yeah, so be on the lookout for this. If this is your first time listening, we appreciate it. Like I mentioned earlier, we've had some punk musicians on here before. Lenny Lashley from Dark Buster and Street Dogs.
Yes.
Like I said, Chad Malone. Other guys that were kind of featured in this doc that have been on this podcast, like Stacy Lane. Of course, Terry Waska. Well, no, he hasn't been on here before this time, but Derek Sanders and Mike DiPetrillo make, small cameos in this thing.
That's
and
right.
They've both been on here a couple times. Who am I forgetting? Of course, Steve Ray mentioned that earlier. Then we've had on people like Lola from Redneck Nosferatu, the Normandies. The entire band was on here.
They even did a song for us acoustic.
Yeah. And they just kicked ass at the Brady last week.
That's right. Opening for Blink-182. That's quite an honor for them. That's awesome.
Yeah. So check out the Normandies if you never had. It's a new generation of punk, but it's not cheesy bullcrap pop punk. It's good stuff.
That's right.
But yeah, like I said, first time listening, we appreciate it. 140 episodes you can check out. We're on SoundCloud.com/Thunder-Underground. Every episode's available for streaming. You can also find a lot of them on YouTube at The Thunder Underground. Mention those guys. If you like thrash, we've had on guys from Death Angel, Sid Falk, formerly of Overkill, Battlecross, Insight. We've had on guys from metal bands like Superjoint, Corrosion and Conformity.
The Obsessed.
Yeah.
Spirit Caravan.
Yeah, a lot of... When you branch off stuff like that, we've had on guys from Truck Fighters, The Sword. Kirk Winstein from Crowbar has been on here a couple of times. Jimmy Bauer from Down and I Hate God.
That's right.
The list is endless, people. When it's not endless, it's 140 long. So go back and check all those out. We appreciate you listening. We're also on 1027WSNR.com. You can listen on the website or download the app and listen to us every Monday night, 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern. We appreciate them having us as a part of their lineup.
For sure.
All right. Until next time.
My wife would just say, I spoke with so-and-so, and he just like, what it's all about? I just thought it was about Dave and his bands. Like, did you watch the trailer?
It's called Dave.
It's called Dave.
It's called Dave and his band.
Capital Underground.
Change it to Dave.
Dave. The Dave Cantrell story. Inspirational to few.
Behind the music.
Yeah.
Thunder Underground, y'all.